Miles de personas llenan calles de Beirut en celebración que ocurre solo una vez al año. Música resuena desde altavoces. Familias caminan juntas hacia mezquitas decoradas con luces. Vendedores ofrecen dulces tradicionales. Es Eid, final de Ramadán, momento de alegría y reunión familiar después de mes de ayuno. Entre multitudes, nadie nota a 4 hombres que no participan exactamente en festividades, sino que las observan cuidadosamente, memorizando patrones de movimiento de multitudes, identificando momentos cuando atención de todos está dirigida hacia celebraciones en lugar de hacia extraños. Estos hombres son equipo de Mossad que ha esperado meses para esta fecha específica, sabiendo que durante Eid, ciudad entera opera en ritmo diferente. Seguridad está más relajada porque todos asumen que nadie atacaría durante celebración religiosa sagrada. Movimiento de personas es masivo haciendo surveillance difícil, y crucialmente, target que buscan estará en ubicación predecible por primera vez en año porque tradición familiar requiere su presencia. En edificio de apartamentos a 3 kilómetros de celebraciones principales. Comandante señor Hezbollah está preparándose para unirse a familia en cena de Eid. Primera vez en meses que ha estado en Beirut abiertamente en lugar de escondido en búnkers del sur. Esta es historia de cómo Mossad transformó celebración religiosa en oportunidad operacional. De cálculo frío detrás de timing que aprovechaba momento cuando defensas psicológicas y físicas estaban más bajas. Y de dilema moral de usar festividad sagrada como cobertura para operación letal. Antes de continuar con esta historia compleja, permíteme compartir algo contigo con sinceridad completa. En las últimas semanas, gracias a personas como tú que han valorado estos análisis profundos y honestos, hemos crecido en 250 suscriptores. Me llena de gratitud genuina porque significa que hay comunidad formándose. Alrededor de contenido que no simplifica ni sensacionaliza realidades complejas. Ahora estamos a 750 suscriptores de nuestro próximo objetivo importante. Y me gustaría invitarte humildemente a ser parte de este crecimiento si aún no te has unido. No quiero presionarte de ninguna manera. Solo explicarte honestamente por qué tu participación importa. Este tipo de investigación toma literalmente meses de trabajo. Verificando fuentes múltiples, construyendo narrativas que respetan ambigüedades morales sin resolver artificialmente. Cuando te suscribes, ayudas a que el algoritmo muestre este contenido a más personas que están buscando exactamente este nivel de análisis sin saberlo. Si sientes que estos videos aportan algo valioso a tu comprensión de cómo operaciones reales funcionan, sería un honor genuino contar contigo. Suscríbete solo si realmente lo sientes. Activa campanitas si quieres notificaciones. Y me encantaría enormemente saber en comentarios desde qué país nos estás viendo. México, Colombia, España, Argentina, Chile, Perú, Venezuela. Estoy genuinamente curioso sobre dónde está esta comunidad global. Ahora sí, vamos a la historia, para entender por qué Mossad eligió Eid al-Fitr como ventana operacional. Debemos comprender el desafío fundamental de target señor de Hezbollah en Beirut. Durante operaciones normales, estos individuos viven en estado de tensión extremo, cambian ubicaciones frecuentemente, usan múltiples layers personnel, comunican a través de métodos que minimizan interception, y crucialmente, evitan patrones predecibles que les podrían explotar. Imagi Magnia, quien fue eventualmente targeted en operación similar en 2008. Era conocido por no dormir en misma ubicación 2 noches consecutivas, por usar disguises cuando apareciendo públicamente, y por mental interno tan compartimentado que incluso dentro de Hezbollah, pocos conocían sus movimientos actuales. Este nivel de Operación hacía targeting extremadamente difícil porque troces no podían establecer patrones confiables. Pero había momentos predecibles en año cuando incluso individuos más tenían que emerger. Celebraciones religiosas mayores donde tradición familiar y expectativas comunitarias creaban obligaciones sociales que eran difíciles de evitar sin despertar sospechas. Marcando final de Ramadán. Era particularmente significativo porque reuniones familiares eran no solo esperadas sino religiosamente importantes. Entonces Israel había identificado qué target específico. Comandante que llamaremos Ahmad aunque ese no era su nombre real. Tradicionalmente pasaba Eid con familia extendida en apartamento específico en Beirut. Información venía de múltiples fuentes, surveillance de años previos que había notado su presencia durante. Incluso cuando estaba oteruice invisible, inminentes de informantes dentro de comunidad que reportaban femilitions. Eagles, que había detectado comunicaciones relacionadas con Planning Deviation familiar. Decisión de planificar Operation alrededor de EID fue debatida intensivamente dentro de Mossad. Argumentos en contra eran significativos. Atacar durante celebración religiosa crearía outrage internacional y doméstico masivo. Podía resultar en civiles porque familias estarían presentes. Y violaba tabú cultural sobre respects incluso durante conflict. Estos concerns no eran solo percolation sino genuine sobre líneas que no deberían ser cruzadas. Argumentos a favor enfatizaban que Ahmad era directly responsible por Plende, que habían matado dozens de israelí civils, que inteligencia sugería que estaba crowning contra israelí targets y que esta podía ser única ventana en año cuando su ubicación era predecible. Desde perspectiva puramente, opportunity era demasiado valiosa para pasar. Compromiso alcanzado fue que Operation sería design para minimizar civilian casualties. Timing sería calculado para momento cuando Ahmad estaba likely para estar separado de otros family members. Método sería precision strike en lugar de brother. Y surveillance en día sería extensive para confirmar que collateral damage podía ser minimized antes de executing. Planning comenzó aproximadamente 6 meses antes de EID. Timing que permitía preparación meticulosa pero también creaba estrés porque erosion dependía de assumption que Ahmad mantendría tradition de defendering. Si cambiaba plans o si Syracuse lo mantenían en búnker en sur, months operation serían desperdiciados. Surveillance Team fue deployada hacia Beirut antes de EID, estableciendo positions que permitían observing apartamento donde fathering ocurriría. Estas positions necesitaban provide desde site mientras cover en ciudad donde Kezos probaba actually. Team usó cover de Vangray Building. Providing legitimate reason para presence y para equipment que oteruise parecería sospechoso. Durant week de surveillance, Team documentó Efring, quien entraba y salía de building. Security mesure en place. Daily routines residents. Potential escape routes se operation few compromised. También estudiaron Celebración durante weeks leading hacia EID, notando cómo traffics cambiaban. Como police presence era adjusted, como public attention era focused en festivities en lugar de en sí concerns. Método de attack seleccionado fue Carbon Conscious Choice porque risks de civiles con car bombs es inherently alto. Pero argumentaban que precision de modern engagement podía minimizar collateral damage mientras ensuring success contra target en movico que tendría Sequitail. Preparation de car bomb fue técnicos que requería balancing explosive power suficiente para ensuring ammunition contra minimize que podía affect nearby civilians. Explosives trabajaron durante wind charge design. Relations basándose en environment específico donde attack ocurriría. Vehicles selected para carrying bomb few acquired through front company. Register position. Leaks antes de EID de manera que no levantaba suspicions. Moving hacia position final en día de ataque requeriría. Careful timing para avoiding attention to Hezbollah's security queue monitoreaba continuously para suspicious vehicles. El team designated para execution consistía de 8 operativos con roles específicos. Surveillance team que confirmaría Ahmad's presence y team que activaría DAIS. Security team que proporcionaría protection durante operation y extraction team que ensuring escape después. Cada member había trained extensively durante months. Simulated capacate condition. Communication durante operation eran crítico porque team members estarían scarcity, needing hacia quarantine real time mientras maintaining encairment donde Hezbollah monitoreaba radio frequencies actively. Encrypted communications devices fueron used, para también backup methods, including visual signals y prearranged timing sequence. Permitían coordination incluso si communes fueron compromised. Days antes de tension en team alcanzó peak levels. The operation estaban about para culminating en operation, que duraría un lets pero que podía fail por less reasons. Wither podía change affecting visibility o timing. Ahmad podía cancel plans en last minutes kitchen podía shuffle. Technical failures podían ocurrir con deviso communications. Final briefing ocurrió 36 operation. Commander revisó y vería aspect plan one more time. At endpoints donde plan podría need adapting. Confirming Q cada team member understood not only his specific role paro tambin. Broader operational picture para, allowing intelligent. Improvisation sees circumstances changed. Commander también addressed elephant in room moral waiting attack, durante religious celebration, acknowledging que algunos team members tenían reserves. Emphasized que target había son no hesitation en attacking Israeli civilians durante the holidays, Q opportunical, y que meticulous planning había been done para mini casualties. But, también made clear Q, any team member uncomfortable con operation podía withdraw sin prejudice no one to Syria forced. No one withdrew. Combinación de professional commitment sans Israeli citizens. Why trust and leaderships, judgment Q operation era justified. Maintain team cohesion. But decision y algunos members le reportaron struggling con moral implications durante years después. La mañana de Eid comenzó con Surveillance Team confirmando que operations para Femothering estaban proceeding normalmente. Families llegaron a apartment durante morning, carrying traditional foods y gifts, behaviors consistent con previous years. Hamad's arrival in town inteligencia había predicted basándose en previous patterns. Aproximadamente a las 2 p.m. Lookout spotted vehicle convoy, approaching apartment, building con security profile, consistent con Ahmad's typical arrangements. Surveillance confirmó Tarvik Ahmad estaba, indeed in convoy, reversed, critic confirmation creation proceed. Team leader radioed all elements. Target confirmed. Proceed to Phase 2. Phase 2 involucró moving car bomb hacia position final. Packing N Street adjacent Asia route Q Ahmad's convoy would take Kondo leaving after family visit. Driving bomb necesitaba avoiding attention mientras positioning precisely. Task Q required calm under extreme pressure pork any suspicious behavior Podria, alert Hezbollah security. Timing calculation error complex. Device needed para, being position disputes, de Ahmad arrived, but antes de he left. Window Q error, estimated N approximately 2 to 3 hours, Basando's and previous year's patterns. But exact timing to his departure couldn't be predicted, requiring Team Para being ready durante the entire window. Surveillance dentro y around ben continuó intense. Team needed Asia, detecting any changes, and security posture Q might indicate compromise. Monitoring Ahmad's likely movements, dentro de apartment Basando's and observable behaviors, de family, why security personnel. Why watching Para, any signs, the unexpected departures, o changes and plans. Aproximadamente a las 4 p.m. hours después de Ahmad's arrival. Surveillance detected signs de preparation para departure. Security personnel checking vehicles. Family members exchanging farewells and apartment entrance. Team leader made call. Target departing imminently. All elements, stand by. Technical team verified device status one final time. Explosive charge era armed. Remote detonation system era functioning. Backup detonation mechanism error. In place C primary failed. Multiple triggering options había been prepared. Remote manual detonation controlled poor operative observing convoy's movement. Automatic detonation triggered poor proximity sensor. Why timer-based detonation como last. Resort C communications failed. Decision about cuando exactly hacia den 20 second. Judgment balancing multiple factors. Ensuring Ahmad's vehicle was en kill zone. Minimizing civilians' en blast radius. Accounting para movement to convoy. Why surrounding traffic. Operative responsible para detonation commando had trained during months para making precisely this tipo de judgment bio pressure. Si has llegado hasta aquí en esta narrativa tensa, realmente te lo agradezco. Sé que este material es moralmente complejo y requiere confrontar realidades incómodas sobre Worf. Si encuentras que vale la pena, me encantaría que consideraras suscribirte al canal si aún no lo has hecho. No te lo pido para mi beneficio personal, sino porque genuinamente creo que estas conversaciones sobre moral en Villain Operation Intelligence necesitan espacios, donde pueden desarrollarse sin simplificaciones. Cada suscripción ayuda a que más personas encuentren este tipo de análisis que no ofrece respuestas fáciles. No hay presión alguna, solo invitación abierta si sientes que este contenido merece tu apoyo. Y me encantaría saber tu opinión en comentarios. ¿Es ético usar Celebration religiosa como timing para Operation militar? Es pregunta genuina, sin respuesta obvia. Tu perspectiva importa. A las 4:37 p.m. Ahmad's convoy salió de Perkingrove, comenzando movement hacia exit the neighborhood. Surveillance tracked vehicles, led security vehicle, Ahmad's personal vehicle, trailing security. Traffic in streets era heavier que usual debido hacia Eads and Slow and Convagra. Technical operator monitoring device, placement confirmed convoy, would pass directly adjacent Asia parked car bomb in approximately 90 seconds. Team leader gave preparatory command. 90 seconds. Final confirmation? Each team element reported. Surveillance clear. Security clear. Technical ready. Extraction standing by. Countdown began. Operator, with detonation control tracked convoy's progress. Using combination D visual observation DESD elevated position. Y reports DESD ground surveillance. At 30 seconds, convoy was blocked temporarily. Poor celebration procession crossing street. Uncertainty hacia timing. At 15 seconds, convoy cleared obstruction. Resuming movement toward device. Location. Operators, training kicked in. Breathing steady. Finger position Sobra detonation trigger. Eyes tracking target vehicle. Peripheral awareness monitoring surrounding civilians. At 5 seconds, calculation, blast radius would affect anyone within approximately 15 meters. Ahmad's vehicle would be at optimal distance in 3 seconds. To civilian vehicles, were in danger zone Paro trailing sufficiently Q timing Podria, minimize their exposure. Detonation. Explosion was precisely calibrated Paro, nonetheless, devastating in immediate radius. Ahmad's vehicle absorbed primary blast. Armored construction partially containing explosive force, Paro not preventing catastrophic damage. Lead security vehicle ahead was damaged Paro primarily, desed shrapnel Y shockwave. Trailing security vehicle was far enough Q, avoided major damage. Immediate aftermath was chaos, predecibel, sirens, screaming, civilians running, security responding. Mossad team immediately began extraction procedures. Qatar operative moving toward pre-designated exit points. Using chaos, Y confusion Como cover. Ahmad was killed instantly, along con driver Y1 security personnel and his vehicle. To security personnel and lead vehicle were injured. Tragically, one civilian and nearby vehicle suffered serious injuries, desed shrapnel. Exactly tipo de collateral damage Q planning had attempted Hasia, minimizing Paro couldn't eliminate completely. Team extraction proceeded, according Hasia plan, Qatar operative reaching safe points within 30 minutes. Eventually exfiltrating desed Lebanon during following 48 hours. Using various methods, Y routes Q had been prepared. Success and extraction was as critical as success and attack itself, captured operatives would. Compromise na ons pero también networks y methods. International reaction Hasia attack was swift Y overwhelmingly negative. Conducting attack, Durante Eid was condemned widely, incluso por countries, typically sympathetic Hasia, Israeli security concerns. Hezbollah used attack para propaganda extensively. Emphasizing timing durante segregar como evidencia de Israeli disregard para Islamic traditions FT. Lebanese government protested formagiación presenting attack como violation de sovereignty, Y terrorism contra civilian celebrations. Syriavan, entonces Ali desboya issue nations. Even some Israeli domestic voices questioned wisdom de timing, arguing Q regardless, de target's guilt. Using religious celebration para operation created unnecessary moral complications, Y diplomatic costs. Israeli government response was officially ambiguous, neither confirming nor denying responsibility. Typical pattern para covert operations. But background briefings Hasia-friendly journalists, Y allies emphasized Ahmad's direct responsibility para planning attacks Durante. Israeli holidays, suggesting implicit justification Q if Hezbollah showed no restraint Durante sacred times. Israel couldn't afford Hasia doing so either. Within Hezbollah reaction combined grief, rage, why importantly, strategic reassessment. Realization Q. Even commanders, who thought themselves secure Durante religious celebrations podium be targeted force changes and security protocols. Future Eid saw senior commanders remaining in southern Lebanon bunkers. Foregoing family gatherings, sacrificing traditions para security concerns. Esta behavioral change, aunque understandable, had its own costs para organization. Lower morale desed commanders separated desed families, Durante important celebrations. Decreased legitimacy within communities, where presence Durante religious occasions was expected. Y psychological de living con constio incluso durante moments que should be safe. Para Israeli military leadership. Operation was evaluated como tactical success, paro strategic mixed result. Elimination de Ahmad, removed dangerous, commander, why disrupted Hezbollah operations temporarily. But international condemnation, why propaganda value Q Hezbollah extracted from timing Durante. Eid created costs, Q some argued exceeded benefits. Debates dentro de Israeli. Security establishment disputes the operation focused on whether similar operations, Durante, religious celebrations, should be conducted in future. Some argued Q operational opportunities, during such moments, were to valuable Hasia, foregoing based on concerns about optics. Others argued Q strategic costs, to violating cultural taboos outweighed tactical gains. No definitive policy emerged, pork circumstances varied. Sometimes targets importance, why opportunities uniqueness, justified controversial timing. Otras veces alternativas existían que avoided moral compliance. Decision-making remained case by case. Con senior, political leadership, Weighing operational value contra diplomatic, why moral costs. Para operatives Q executed operation. Psychological processing few complex. Professional satisfaction de successful difficult operation mixed. Con discomfort sobre, timing why about civilian. Injury Q had occurred despite attempts, Hatia minimizing collateral damage. Debriefing sessions addressed these feelings. Para no simple resolution existed para moral ambiguities, Q operation represented. Some operatives rationalized by focusing en emods, responsibility para attacks that had killed Israeli civilians, Duranti their holidays. Religious celebrations had never been respected by enemy, so reciprocal restraint was naive. Others struggled MS, profundament con feeling Q, using Eid as cover violated something fundamental. Regardless, the target's guilt. Support systems, para-operatives, included counseling that acknowledged moral complexity, instead de-attempting Hatia, resolving it simplistically. Recognizing Q some actions necessary para, security nonetheless, carry moral weight. Incluso cuando justifican para, operative. Hatia processing experiences, authentically, instead de suppressing doubts Q could emerge, as psychological problems later. El impact sobre families de operatives was also significant, though menos discussed. Spouses knew generally Q, significant operation had occurred paro not details, creating distance born to secrets Q couldn't be shared. Some operatives struggled con guilt about missing own family time Duranti. Eid season para, conducting operation targeting someone Duranti, their family time. Para el que felt uncomfortable incluso when logic justified action. International precedents set by operation were concerning Hatia, some analysts. If religious celebrations became acceptable timing para covert operations, would escalation occur where both sides increasingly violated previously respected boundaries? Would this lead toward total war don no times or places were considered off-limits? Historical precedent showed mixed patterns. Some conflicts had maintained certain restraints sobre religious timing incluso cuando other norms collapsed. Others had seen progressive erosion de all limits. Predicting future trajectories was difficult pork outcomes depended tanto en strategic calculations como en leadership. Decisions durante crisis moments cuando passions rise. Para Mossad's institutional memory. Operation became case study en tanto tactical execution como strategic calculation de timing controversial operations. Training de future operatives included examination de decision-making process. Technical execution, why importantly, ethical dimensions Q required consideration. Some instructors emphasized Q operation demonstrated feasibility to targeting even well-protected individuals C timing why planning were optimal. Others emphasized lessons about collateral damage remaining unavoidable, incluso con careful planning. Why about international costs de violating cultural norms, incluso en pursuit de legitimate military targets. El civilian Q was injured in attack. Spring serious para un anti-Israeli narratives dentro de Lebanon y brother region. His story was highlighted en media repeatedly, innocent man celebrating Eid con family. Suddenly caught en violence, life permanently changed por attack Q targeted someone else. Israeli intelligence monitored these narratives. Recognizing propaganda value Q. Hezbollah extracted paro, enable Hatia countering effectively sin confirming responsibility Q officially remained ambiguous. This inability Hatia, defending publicly actions conducted covertly was frustrating but inherent limitation de covert operations. Longer-term impacts sobre Israeli-Lebanese relations were marginal pork relationship was already hostile. Paro operation reinforced narratives cut aside, held about other. Israel saw Hezbollah commanders como legitimate targets, regardless de timing. Lebanon saw Israeli actions como terrorism sin respect para civilians or sacred traditions. Neither perspective changed significantly. Paro each was reinforced. For academic, researchers studying intelligence operations y ethics, operation provided rich material para analysis. Papers were written examining proportionality calculations cuando targeting durante civilian celebrations. About distinctions between combatants, why civilians cuando latter are present during operations. Why about cultural sensitivity in modern warfare. No consensus emerged desde academic debates, mirroring lack de consensus dentro de intelligence communities. Legitimate arguments existed on multiple sides. Trade-offs were genuine. Why right answers were context-dependent and ways Q frustrated those seeking universal principles. Religious scholars também debated implications. Some argued que all life sacred durante Eid many violence during celebration, particularly egregious. Others argued Q those who plan violence forfeit protections to sacred times. Some emphasized Q using sacred times como shield paramilitary commanders was itself from the desecration. Theological debates paralleled strategic ones, demonstrating como deep these questions reached. Ahora quiero pausar para pregunta sincera. Si has llegado hasta este punto en análisis tan moralmente complejo, claramente valoras profundidad sobre simplicidad. Te invitaría humildemente a considerar suscribirte si encuentras que este contenido merece existir y alcanzar audiencias más amplias. No es about números sino sobre crear espacio donde conversaciones difíciles pueden ocurrir sin requerir respuestas fáciles. Somos 250 personas más que hace semanas. Cada una decidió que valía la pena apoyar. Si llegamos a esos 750 amplificamos impacto juntos. Un clic si sientes que lo merecemos. Y dime, ¿cómo deberíamos balancear Aprovechó contra cultural tabús? Tu perspectiva genuinamente importa en estas conversaciones. Los cambios en Hezbollah después de Operación fueron extensivos y costosos para Organization. Senior Commanders adoptaron protocolos más restrictivos durante Family and Securities. Esta separación desde familias creaba resentment y fatigue que aferrado durante years. Junior Operates observando estos sacrificios que leadership hacía de villains. Some saw it como demonstration de commitment Q, inspired loyalty. Others saw it como evidence Q, Israeli intelligence, capabilities, was so extensive Q normal life, was impossible para commanders. Raising questions about sustainability, the resistance campaign, recruitment dentro de Hezbollah, was affected in complex ways. Operation demonstrated risks pero también galvanized some hacia joining desire para revenge. Net effect sobre recruitment numbers was probably neutral. Paro composition shifted toward those motivated specifically for anti-Israeli sentiment rather than broader social or political reasons. Training programs dentro de Hezbollah incorporated lessons des attack, emphasizing operational security durante all times, avoiding predictable patterns, incluso durante religious celebrations. Why maintaining security awareness, even cuando circumstances suggested relaxation was safe. Paradoxically, Israeli operation made Hezbollah's operatives more professional in some respects. International intelligence communities observed Operation Y its aftermath closely, extracting their own lessons. Some services saw blueprint para exploiting cultural moments, cuando targets, were predictable. Others saw cautionary tale about costs to violating cultural norms. Different services reached different conclusions basandos in their own cultural contexts, why strategic situations. Western olis de Israel generally supported privately incluso cuando criticizing public. Recognizing legitimacy, the targeting Hezbollah commanders Paro needing Haishia, maintaining public distance, desd controversial timing. This private support/public criticism dynamic is common feature de intelligence cooperation. Allowing countries, Haishia coordinating operationally mantras managing domestic political constraints. Non-aligned countries used Operation como example de why international norms against. Extrajudicial killings needed strengthening. Arguments were made in UN forums Q, allowing such operations undermined rule de law, why created dangerous precedents. Israel why allies countered Q terrorist organizations como Hezbollah operated outside legal frameworks, making conventional law enforcement approaches inadequate. Legal scholars debated whether operation violated international humanitarian law. Principe de distinction between combatants y civilians. Proportionality damage must not be excessive relative Haitian military advantage, why precaution minimizing civilian harm were all examined. Legal opinions varied dramatically based on which principles were emphasized why how circumstances were characterized. Media coverage. The operation followed predictable patterns. Outlets sympathetic Haitian, Israel emphasized targets, responsibility power attacks, why claimed minimal civilian casualties. Outlets critical emphasized timing durante sacred celebration, why highlighted injured civilian. Objective middle ground was difficult Haitian, finding pork facts themselves were disputed why. Interpretations were deeply colored by prior perspectives. Social media amplified polarization. Con echo chambers reinforcing existing viewpoints rather than promoting nuanced discussion. Graphics showing blast site were shared widely, interpreted differently by different audiences, some seeing precise targeting the dangerous individual, others seeing reckless violence, Duranty celebration, para-historians studying evolution to warfare. Operation represented continuation to trends Haitian, increased precision and targeting combined con decreased restraint. Sobre timing location. Technology, enabling more precise strikes, created permission structure para operations. Previously considered to risky dado collateral damage potential. Some historians argued this represented progress. Better precision meant fewer total civilian casualties compared Haitian previous eras. Others argued erosion to restraint sobra, when where operations could occur increased total violence by removing limiting factors previously constrained conflict. Philosophical debates about operation touched fundamental questions. What makes action ethical when consequences are mixed? How weigh eliminating dangerous, individual contra, violating sacred timing? Can means be so problematic they taint ends regardless, the legitimacy? Different ethical frameworks led toward different conclusions. Consequentialists focused on outcomes. Amod eliminated, minimal casualties, Hezbollah disrupted. Balance favored operation despite costs. Deontologistes focused on principle using sacred celebration violated duties toward respecting religious traditions regardless the outcomes. Virtue ethicists asked, what action said about agent's character? Did it demonstrate necessary hardness or troubling callousness? Psychological research sobre operatives conducting morally ambiguous operations shows lasting impacts. Some develop cynicism as defense mechanism. Others experience moral injury that differs des PTSD by involving guilt sobre actions rather than fear des trauma. Support systems para addressing these impacts evolved paro remained imperfect. Military chaplains working con special operations. Units reported operatives struggling most weren't those conducting clearly justified operations or those conducting clearly wrong actions, but those operating in gray areas donde reasonable people disagreed about ethics. Ambiguity itself was source de prolonged distress. Y con esto llegando toward conclusión, espero haber proporcionado comprensión profunda de operación que no ofrece respuestas fáciles, pero que explora honestamente complejidades. Si este análisis te dio nueva perspectiva, te agradecería enormemente si dieras like. Compártelo con alguien que apreciaría profundidad sin moralizaciones simplistas. Y nos vemos en próximo video donde continuaremos explorando realidades difíciles de entender. Gracias por tu tiempo, atención y disposición de confrontar ambigüedad moral sin exigir resoluciones artificiales. Hasta pronto, profundizando en dimensiones que raramente son exploradas públicamente. Debemos examinar proceso de education de Ahmad como Target y Intense Profile durante years que precedieron Operation. Tracking Senior, Hezbollah Commanders Require Patience, Extraordinary. Porque estos individuos operan con secures que hace surveillance tradicional extremadamente difficult. Ahmad había sido en Mossad radar desde Proxy 2003. Cuando Intelligence linked him Haitian, planning the attack contra Israeli interests en overseas location. Initial identification vino through SIG's inteligencia que interceptó commissions usando métodos que permanecen classified pero que involved exploitation de vulnerabilities en commission. Systems, Hezbollah believed eran secure. Building con profile de Ahmad requería integración de múltiples streams durante years. Human intelligence sources dentro de Lebanon proporcionaba información sobre connections. De sus daily routes cuando observables, positioned en hierarchy. Signals, intelligence tracked his communications patterns. Identificando his como incluso cuando content de messages era encrypted y unreadable. Technical incluyó tracking desments cuando usaba electronic devices que emitían signatures. Aunque Ahmad era careful hacia mini missions. Financial intelligence traced funding flows connected Haitian operations bio his command. Revelando organizacional structures y operacional priorities. Each stream individualmente proporciona other pieces. Integrated analysis constructed more complete picture. Psycholo de Ahmad también fue developed. Attempting Haitian, understanding his decision-making patterns, his risk tolerance, his vulnerabilities. Profile was assembled desd behavioral observations, desd information about his background, why formative experiences. Why DESD analysis to past operational decisions. Understanding psychology wasn't just academic exercise. It informed predictions sobre how he might react to various situations. One critical finding: DESD psychological profiling error Q. Ahmad valued family connections deeply despite security-conscious lifestyle. He had made efforts durante previous years Haitian, attending family gatherings durante major religious celebrations, incluso cuando doing so create a security risk. Este pattern sugested que Itzenson represented predictable volume que podía haber exploited. Verificación de esta requería years de paciente observación. Surveillance teams monitored apartment building don family gatherings occurred during multiple Eids. Documenting patterns, quando family members arrived, quando Ahmad typically appeared, how long he stayed. What security arrangements accompanied his visits. Cada data point added confidence Haitian prediction Q pattern would continue. But predictions are never certainties. Why planning Operation Basandos, an assumption Q pattern, would continue required, accepting risk Q Ahmad might deviate in crucial moment. Contingency planning addressed this. If Ahmad no appeared, operation would be aborted sin prejudice. Resources allocated Haitian other targets, why surveillance continued toward identifying future opportunities. Debate dentro de Mossad sobre Ringit comenzó long antes de specific abortion contra Ahmad. Some officials argued Q cultural sensitivity demanded, respecting religious celebrations regardless the operational considerations. They emphasized long-term costs, alienating moderate Muslims who might otherwise be sympathetic toward Israeli security concerns. Providing propaganda hacia some extremists undermine Israel's while claims a moral ground. Others argued Q Hezbollah had demonstrated repeatedly Q they observed no restraint durante Jewish holidays, having planned why executed attacks durante Passover, Yom Kippur, why other sacred times. Desde esta perspective unilateral Israeli restraint durante Muslim holidays was strategic disadvantage Q enemies exploited. War's ugly realities, they argued, sometimes required actions Q violated peacetime norms. Middle position emerged. Operations durante religious celebrations weren't categorically prohibited. Paro required higher level authorization. Why more stringent criteria para justification? Targets, importance needed toward being extraordinary. Alternative opportunities needed toward being inadequate. Civilian casualty risks needed toward being minimized through exceptional precautions. ESTA framework required case-by-case evaluation rather than blanket policy. Ahmad's case met heightened criteria. Intelligence indicated he was planning major Operation Q potentially threaten hundreds of Israeli lives. Alternatives para targeting him in different context had been exhausted durante years sin success. Why planning demonstrated Q civilian casualties podium be limited through precise timing why technical execution. Authorization para operation went toward Prime Minister level, reflecting sensitivity. Briefing materials presented to political leadership outlined operational plan. Assessment to success probability. Analysis to expected casualties both target, why potential collateral. Why evaluation to strategic costs from international reaction, why propaganda, value Haitian Hezbollah. Political leadership's decision to authorize wasn't unanimous, even within small circle Q was briefed. Some ministers expressed reservations Q were noted Paro not sufficient toward blocking operation given security arguments. Democrat process within Israel, incluso para classified operations, involved debate why accountability on que public was necessarily excluded desde these deliberations. Technical preparation para car bomb involved extensive testing in controlled environments. Explosives needed to generating sufficient force para defeating Ahmad's armored vehicle mantras minimizing blast radius toward protecting nearby civilians. Shaped charge, design focused explosive energy directionally. Reducing collateral effects mientras maintaining lethally contra target. Testing occurred in remote facility, and Negev desert don't replica the urban environment was constructed. Multiple iterations refined explosive composition, placement, why triggering mechanisms. Engineers measured blast effects meticulously, using sensors Q recorded over pressure. Fragmentation patterns, why thermal effects at various distances. Vehicle selection para carrying bomb involved trade-offs. Larger vehicle could carry more powerful charge Paro, would be more conspicuous. Smaller vehicle was less noticeable Paro limited explosive capacity. Compromise was reached. Mid-sized vehicle Q could be parked naturally, without attracting attention Mayantra's carrying. Sufficient explosives, per our mission requirements. Acquisition de vehicle through untraceable channels took weeks. Front company purchased vehicle, registered it legitimately. White gradually introduced it toward Beirut Environment Week's antes de operation. Suspicious sudden appearance, the unfamiliar vehicle might alert Hezbollah's counter-surveillance. So vehicle needed toward being established as normal part, the neighborhood landscape. Operatives responsible para preparation y placement, the device trained extensively. Handling explosives safely, while minimizing detection risk, required technical expertise combined con-com under pressure. Training included scenarios don things went wrong, premature discovery the device, technical malfunctions, unexpected changes en target movements. Each scenario was rehearsed until responses were automatic. Comuniques plan para Operación día recognized que Hezbollah monitored radiofrequencias actively. Encrypted digital communications were primary method. Paro backups included pre-arranged visual signals. Coded text messages sent through commercial cellular networks Q appeared innocuous, Haitian casual observation. Why ultimately, pre-established timing sequences Q allowed coordination incluso sign real-time communications. Medical support planning addressed possibility to team casualties. Trauma teams were positioned near extraction routes, ready para treating gunshot wounds, blast injuries. Other trauma Q could occur see operation went badly. Operatives carried medical supplies sufficient para initial treatment. Traîner dans combat firsted, pre-series would require professional medical intervention. Legal advisors within Israeli military reviewed operation plans. Certifying Q operation complied con Israeli interpretation de international law regarding targeted killings. This legal review wasn't merely bureaucratic exercise. It provided documentation Q could be relevant. Sea operations were challenged in international forums or Israeli courts. Interpretations to international law varied dramatically among different legal traditions. Israeli position emphasized self-defense against imminent threats. Argued Q Hezbollah commanders were legitimate military targets. Why claimed Q precautions taken demonstrated compliance con proportionality requirements. Critics challenged each premise, arguing Q imminent was interpreted too broadly. Q timing Duranty Eid violated civilian protection principles. Why Q claimed precautions were inadequate. Insurance provisions para operatives families in case the casualties were reviewed why updated. Special operations carried special benefits, recognizing extraordinary risks. Families were informed in general terms Q increased risk exposure was occurring without providing operational details. This notification balanced security requirements con ethical obligation toward preparing families para worst outcomes. Psychological screening to operatives, immediately antes, the operation assessed mental readiness. Brief interviews by military psychologists verified Q operatives were focused. Understood mission. Why weren't experiencing psychological distress Q might compromise performance. Anyone showing signs to excessive stress or reservations could be substituted without stigma. None were substituted. Professional commitment, why confidence and preparation meant team was ready psychologically as well as technically. But readiness didn't mean absence to moral qualms. Several operatives later reported experiencing internal conflict mantras, maintaining professional exterior, why operational effectiveness. Final equipment check-in morning to Eid was thorough. Every weapon, communication device, explosive component, vehicle, Y-piece to surveillance equipment was verified functional. Redundancies were confirmed. Backup batteries, alternative communication channels, secondary detonation triggers. Murphy's Law assumed everything Q could go wrong eventually would, so mitigations were essential. Weather conditions and day were monitored continuously. Clear skies were preferred para optimal surveillance, while precision targeting. Paro light cloud cover actually provided was acceptable. Wind was minimal, reducing concerned Sobra blast effects being deflected unpredictably. Temperature was moderate, Avoiding extremes Q might affect explosives performance or operative comfort, Duranty extended surveillance. Traffic patterns and EID presented complex challenges. Increased civilian movement made blending easier para-operatives tambin increased risk to collateral casualties. Timing calculations needed toward accounting traffic density. Ensuring convoy would be en relatively clear section de road quando device detonated. Surveillance teams feeding information hacia common element. Religious scholars consulted beforehand by some involved, en authorization provided perspective Q military, why intelligence professionals lacked. They explained significance to EID, depth to religious importance, likely community reactions toward violence, durante celebration. Some scholars target que attack durante EID while being interpreted as attack in Islam itself, galvanizing opposition beyond what tactical success could justify. Other scholars noted Hezbollah's own actions durante Jewish holidays created context, donned reciprocal actions. Mientras regrettable could be characterized Israeli transgression. They argued moral responsibility lay primarily con those who initiated patanda, violating sacred times. Not con those responding within that pattern. Diversity de opinion among religious scholars paralleled diversity within military, why intelligence communities. No consensus existed pork underlying values, why priorities differed. Those emphasizing absolute sanctity, the religious celebrations reached different conclusions than those emphasizing reciprocity, those prioritizing. Israeli civilian protection above cultural sensitivities. Surveillance, positions and data operation were established before dawn. Teams positioned in apartments, rooftops, while vehicles provided sightlines toward target, building mantras remaining covert. Equipment included long-range cameras, communications gear, weapons para self-defense compromised. Operatives were prepared remaining in position durante hours necessary. Waiting during hours antes, the target's appearance tested patience-wide discipline. Operatives maintained alertness despite tedium, monitoring continuously, reporting regular updates toward command. False alarms occurred. Vehicles resembling AMODs, convoy approaching then deviating. Security sweeps, temporarily raised concerns compromise. Psychological stress during waiting period was managed through training instilled discipline. Operatives used breathing techniques, mental rehearsal to upcoming actions, while mutual support quando communicating con team members. Maintaining optimal stress levels aroused enough peak performance. Not so anxious judgment was impaired, was learned skill. When AMOD's convoy finally appeared was confirmed, adrenaline surge affected all team members, predictably. Training helped managing physiological responses, elevated heart rate, heightened sensory acuity, narrowed attention focus. Experienced operatives recognized these responses used them productively, rather than being overwhelmed. Countdown toward detonation involved continuous reassessment. Verification target was en correct vehicle. Confirmation civilian exposure was minimized, ensuring technical systems were functioning. Each checkpoint was confirmed antes to proceeding toward next phase. Abort criteria were clear. If any critical factor was negative, operation stopped immediately. Decision toward detonating ultimately rested con single operative who had final trigger control. Despite command oversight, team input. Moment-to-moment judgment during fluid situation required, empowering individual con authority toward executing aborting based en circumstances he could observe directly. This trust was earned through extensive training demonstrated judgment. Post-detonation, immediate aftermath was partially obscured by smoke dust. Surveillance turned outcome había target been destroyed. Were there unexpected casualties? Should extraction proceed were follow-up actions needed? Seconds felt like minutes during information gathering phase before clear picture emerged. Confirmation to successful target. Elimination came through multiple sources. Visual observation destroyed vehicle. Signals intelligence intercepts. The Hezbollah communications reporting commander killed. Eventually, public statements. Each confirmation source increased confidence. Complete certainty took hours toward establishing. Extraction procedures were executed professionally despite emotional responses toward mission completion. Relief, satisfaction, lingering concerns civilian injured, All were present Paro subordinated toward necessity to reaching safety. Tradecraft, during extraction, was as meticulous as during operation. Recognizing Q letting guard down prematurely could compromise success at last moment. Debriefing Durante's subsequent days was extensive. Every aspect of the operation was reviewed. What worked, what didn't, what should be changed para future operations. Technical performance to equipment was assessed. Decision-making was analyzed. Moral-wise psychological impacts were discussed. Lessons learned were documented for institutional memory. Media management after operation involved balancing security requirements, con-public relations needs. Official ambiguity about Israeli responsibility was maintained. Paro background briefings toward friendly journalists provided context Q-shaped coverage, emphasizing targets, responsibility para attacks contra Israeli civilians, minimizing civilian casualties from operation, while avoiding explicit confirmation d Israeli involvement was delicate communication challenge. International diplomacy during days disputes involved. Reassuring allies Q operation was justified mantras managing criticism desd other countries. Private communications differed significantly desd public statements privately. American officials were briefed comprehensively, while expressed understanding even when publicly expressing concerns about timing. Palestinian Arab reactions were predictably hostile, but Israeli analysts monitored particularly para-moderate voices that might indicate operation had crossed lines Q alienated potential partners. Some moderate Arab commentators criticized timing Durante Eid specifically, distinguishing between legitimate security operations, generally, while culturally insensitive timing specifically. Si has reachado hasta aquí en análisis tan extenso dread attention. If encuentras value humble invitation towards sí o no. No pressure, necesitamos 750 más. Cada suscripción helps. Y genuinely want conocer. ¿Desde qué país nos ves y qué opinas sobre using cultural moments para vintage? Ment con tu país por favor. Y ahora truching final sections de este análisis. Continuáramos explorando. Remaining dimensions Q complete. Understanding requires. Continuando con dimensiones finales que requieren exploración profunda. Debemos examinar cycles para operatives durante months y years después. Participating in Operation Q killed target. Durante religious celebration created moral. Residue Q affected. Individuals differently based in their personal backgrounds. Religious beliefs. Why psychological resilience. Juan operative quien era observant. Struggled particularly con parallel. Entree disrupting. Eid celebration why historical Jewish experience to being targeted during own religious observances. His internal conflict wasn't about targets, guilt-o operational necessity. Paro about contributing toward cycle to violating sacred times. Counseling helped him processing, but resolution remained incomplete. Another, más secular en orientación. Experienced less moral distress about religious timing. Paro struggled con civilian injury Q had occurred despite planning. Guilt about unintended consequences persisted incluso quando logically understanding Q perfect. Precision was impossible in combat operations. Distinction between logical understanding why emotional acceptance was difficult toward bridging. Third operative reported experiencing nightmares, know about violence, per se Paro about familial scenes. Imagining targets, children learning to father's death, Durante celebration. Paralleling operatives' own family experiences Durante holidays. Impunity. Incluso mientras regresa eliminating threat. Created cognitive dissonance Q. Was professionally managed Paro personally costly. Team debriefings addressed these psychological impacts openly. Recognizing Q, suppressing moral concerns, was unhealthy, why counterproductive. Culture within elite, Israeli units, has evolved toward acknowledging psychological costs openly rather than demanding stoic silence. Esta evolution reflects broader understanding to combat stress, why moral injury. Comparative analysis de Israeli. Approach versus other nations' special operations units reveals interesting differences. American special operations psychology support tends toward emphasizing mission accomplishment, why patriotic. Duty, while being more circumspect about validating moral doubts. British approach is historically more focused on individual resilience, con less institutional support. Israeli approach. Perhaps influenced by small nations' existential awareness, why Judaic tradition de ethical questioning engages more directly con moral ambiguity. Long-term follow-up con operatives from this operation conducted through confidential surveys, rather than identifying individuals, showed varied trajectories. Some reported complete psychological integration de experience, with no persistent distress. Others reported episodic, intrusive thoughts or emotional reactions triggered by specific reminders. Few reported severe ongoing psychological impairment, suggesting Q selection why support systems were generally effective. Family impacts were significant aunque less discussed publicly. Spouses sensed quando operatives were processing difficult experiences, incluso sin knowing details. Some relationships strengthened through mutual support despite communication barriers. Mientras others were strained by secrets Q created emotional distance. Children occasionally sensed parental distress without understanding causes, creating confusion. One operative's marriage eventually ended in divorce that he partially attributed toward cumulative effects, declassified operations. This one included inability Hatia, fully sharing experiences, created barrier Q partner found insurmountable. Esta outcome, aunque unfortunate, was not uncommon among special operations personnel globally. Reflecting inherent tensions entre operational security requirements, why intimate relationship needs. Institutional lessons learned from operation extended beyond tactical details toward strategic questions about targeting policies. Senior Israeli leadership recognized Q operations durant religious celebrations. Mientras sometimes necessary, carried costs Q needed toward being carefully weighed. Policy guidance evolved toward requiring explicit consideration to cultural sensitivity and authorization process. Esta evolution didn't mean categorical prohibition paro, did mean Q bar para approval was raised. Future operations during religious celebrations needed toward demonstrating Q no reasonable alternatives existed. Q target importance justified cultural costs, why Q exceptional precautions minimized unintended harm. Documentary record to these considerations protected decision-makers from charges to cultural insensitivity or recklessness. Telling us about las evolution después de Operation Interesting Patterns. Initially, organization went into defensive crouch, restricting movements to senior commanders, increasing security protocols, while avoiding predictable patterns. Esta defensive posture reduced their operational tempo temporarily. Achieving strategic benefit para Israel sin additional kinetic operations. Eventually, Hezbollah adapted, developing new patterns Q balanced security needs con operational requirements. Commanders became more compartmentalized, delegating authority para avoiding single points to failure. Communication methods evolved toward resisting Israeli signals intelligence. Training emphasized unpredictability, while rapid decision-making Q reduced vulnerability toward planned Israeli operations. Esta adaptive cycle Israeli operation forcing Hezbollah adaptation, requiring Israeli counter-adaptation, is characteristic to sustained adversarial relationships donned both sides continuously evolve. No permanent advantage exists because intelligence contest is dynamic rather than static. Success is measured not in decisive victories paro and maintaining favorable balance over time. Regional implications, the operation extended beyond immediate Israeli-Lebanese context. Other countries facing threats, des non-state armed groups studied Israeli methods. Some seeking toward emulating tactical approaches mientras others, drawing lessons about strategic costs to controversial operations. International intelligence cooperation involved, sharing the technical lessons. Mientras, respecting each nation's unique political constraints. Iran, como prakerdes voya, responded toward operation con increased support designed toward offsetting losses. Financial assistance, weapons transfers, while training programs were intensified. Iranian calculation was Q abandoning Hezbollah during vulnerability would undermine credibility con other regional proxies. Thus, Israeli tactical success triggered Iranian strategic response Q partially offset gains. Saudi Arabia, while the Sunni states, aunque not publicly supportive the Israeli operations, privately welcomed weakening to Hezbollah Q they viewed as Iranian proxy threatening regional balance. As operation had unintended consequence, to marginally improving Israeli relations con Sunni Arab states through shared interests and containing Iranian influence. Demonstrating Como tactical operations can have unpredicted strategic ripple effects. Academic study the operation contributed toward literature and targeted killings. Proportionality en warfare by cultural considerations, military operations. Case became standard reference and military ethics courses, used toward illustrating moral dilemmas, without obvious resolutions. Different instructors emphasized different aspects, reflecting their own normative commitments. Students analyzing case, generally, divided entree roughly 3 camps. Those concluding operation was justified, given security imperatives, why precautions taken. Those concluding it was unjustified, libido toward cultural insensitivity, why civilian risk. Why those concluding it represented difficult trade-off, don reasonable people could disagree. Distribution of student opinion often correlated con their prior perspectives, an Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Suggesting Q positions and specific case were influenced por broader political orientations. Research psychologists studying moral decision-making used Operation Como case study and trolley problem variations. Is it ethical toward taking action Q causes limited harm toward preventing greater harm? How important are intentions versus outcomes? Do cultural considerations override security calculations? Experimental studies showed Q framing effects significantly influenced judgments, suggesting Q moral intuitions about case were malleable rather than firmly grounded. Legal challenges toward Israeli-targeted killing policy generally, including operations during celebrations specifically, have been brought in Israeli courts for human rights organizations. Supreme Court rulings have generally upheld legality mantras, imposing requirements. Proportionality assessments, why alternatives consideration. Judicial deference toward military expertise and security matters means Q courts rarely override operational decisions retrospectively. International legal forums, including International Criminal Court, have received complaints about Israeli-targeted killings. Prosecutions have not advanced primarily due toward jurisdictional questions, why political. Complications rather than merits, the legal claims. This legal impunity has been criticized by human rights advocates who argue Q lack de accountability encourages future violations. Israeli perspective is Q international legal forums are politically biased, why that compliance con international law, as interpreted por hostile actors, would render self-defense impossible. This fundamental disagreement sobra legitimacy de international. Legal institutions themselves means Q legal debates about specific operations like this one occur in context, the broader contestation about legal frameworks, applicability. Media literacy analysis to how operation was covered reveals predictable patterns also interesting nuances. Mainstream Israeli media generally supported operation, while noting timing sensitivity. International media varied dramatically, con European outlets being more critical, why American coverage being more balanced. Arab media uniformly condemned Operation Como terrorism. Social media discourse showed extreme polarization, con virtually no middle ground. Supporters emphasized targets, guilt why operational precision. Critics emphasized Eid timing why civilian injury. Attempts toward nuanced discussion were drowned out por competing narratives. Illustrating Como complex moral issues get simplified, and digital public sphere toward serving identity politics. Counter-narratives that challenged dominant perspectives in each community were marginalized. Israelis, questioning operation timing, were accused of undermining national security. Arabs, acknowledging targets' military role, were accused of legitimizing Israeli aggression. This suppression internal dissent within each camp prevented productive cross-cultural dialogue that might have advanced mutual understanding. Comparative historical analysis shows Q using religious or cultural celebrations. Para-military advantage has ancient precedent remains controversial. Examples range des Trojan horse, using religious festival infiltration. Toward various historical battles timed toward religious holidays quando opponents' defenses were assumed toward being lower. Modern warfare hasn't eliminated these calculations. Paro has added layer da. International scrutiny, why media coverage Q amplifies political costs. Evolution de normes sobre targeting durante celebrations shows gradual strengthening. Encryption de protection. Geneva Conventions, why subsequent protocols, established principles. Paro enforcement remains weak. WHAT has changed MS significantly, is public awareness, why expectations. Creating political costs, Q effect calculations, incluso cuando legal prohibitions are ambiguous. Future warfare will likely see continued tension on trade tactical opportunities. Presented poor cultural moments, why strategic costs, de exploiting them. Technology, enabling more precise targeting potentially reduces civilian casualties. Paro doesn't resolve fundamental question about appropriateness, de violating cultural norms. Thus, technical progress doesn't eliminate ethical dilemmas. Paro transforms their parameters. Younger generation de Israeli military officers, many educated in Western universities, con exposure toward international humanitarian law, why ethics courses, sometimes express different perspectives than older generation. Some embrace more restrictive interpretation de cuando operations are justified, arguing Q Israel's long-term security depends and moral legitimacy as much as military capability. Others view this as naive idealism that ignores harsh realities, de regional threats. Generational debates within Israeli security establishment mirror broader societal divisions sobre balance entre security y morality, entre pragmatism y principles. No consensus exists, why none is likely toward emerging pork underlying values aren't reconcilable. Democratic process manages these tensions imperfectly through debates among elected leaders, why appointed officials. CODA, bringing their perspectives toward authorization decisions. International pressure toward restraining targeted killings has had mixed effects. On one hand, Israeli leadership is sensitized toward international opinion, why factors diplomatic costs toward authorization decisions. On other hand, perception Q international community is inherently biased, reduces weight given toward external criticism. Net effect is probably modest influence toward marginally increasing restraint, while not fundamentally changing policies. Alternative approaches toward addressing Hezbollah threat have been proposed repeatedly for critics to targeted killings. Diplomatic engagement, addressing root causes to conflict. Regional peace initiatives, to-dos have been suggested como substitutes para kinetic operations. Israeli these alternatives, mientras desirable in principle, are unavailable in practice, given Hezbollah's ideological commitment toward Israeli destruction, why Iranian backing. Effectiveness, the targeted killings como counterterrorism strategy is debated extensively. Proponents point toward disrupted operations, degraded leadership, why deterrent effects. Critics argue Q martyrdom enhances recruitment, operations accelerate radicalization. Why tactical successes don't translate toward strategic resolution. Mixed, partly porque counterfactuals what Ravenhovel. This specific operation's effectiveness can be assessed in multiple dimensions. Tactically, elimination de Amod disrupted Hezbollah operations temporarily, why removed experienced commander. Strategically, operation contributed toward deterrence posture, why demonstrated Israeli capabilities. Politicamente operation generated propaganda Q Hezbollah exploited, or international criticism Q complicated Israeli diplomacy. Net assessment depends on weights assigned toward different dimensions. Y ahora reaching final phase de analysis. Agradezco profundamente tu atención durante exploración tan extensiva de Moralization. If genuinely found valuable, would be honored having you como subscriber. See no. Somos 250 stronger, ning 750 más. Subscribe. Si gustó, comparte. Si conoces some in depth diamonds que habría sido tu decision si estuvieras en leadership. Incluye tu país. Nos vemos próximo video explorando más realities de cofros. Gracias por valorar truth sobre simplist. Hasta pronto. Antes de verdadero closing. Hay dimensiones finales críticas sobre training específico que prepares para exactly este tipo de proliferation. Months until the execution team underwent specialized training addressing not solo technical aspects, paro tambin. Ethical decision-making under pressure, why cultural sensitivity Q paradoxically was needed incluso mientras planning operation. Durante cultural celebration, training modules, included sessions con religious scholars Q explain significance, deed from Muslim perspective. Not Haitian discouraging Operation Paro toward ensuring operatives fully understood what timing meant para target community. Esta understanding served multiple purposes. Informing better operational planning Q could minimize offense beyond what was inherent. Preparing operatives para psychological aftermath, to violating cultural norm. Why providing context para potential capture scenario donned cultural knowledge might be relevant. Role-playing exercises during training forced operatives toward articulating justifications para operation towards skeptical audiences. Playing devil's advocate, instructors challenged every rationale. Requiring operatives toward defending decisions not just operationally paro ethically. Esta wasn't gratuitous, difficulty paro, recognition Q operatives functioning and morally ambiguous. Situations needed toward having wrestled con ethical dimensions consciously rather than suppressing doubts. Scenario training included variations don civilian casualties were higher than anticipated. Don target wasn't present requiring real-time decision about whether toward aborting. Don technical failures occurred at critical moments. Each scenario required rapid ethical decision-making, proceed knowing greater harm than planned, abort despite investment, why lost opportunity, accept partial success versus risking complete failure. No answers were provided. Team needed toward working through decisions collectively. Psychological preparation also addressed anticipated aftermath. How would operatives feel executing Operation Durante Celebration? How would they process if civilian casualties exceeded expectations? How would they maintain operational security with families' mantras managing emotional impacts? Discussing these questions beforehand didn't eliminate difficulties, paro reduced shock, why provided framework para processing. Cultural intelligence, briefing covered not just targets culture paro tambien operational. Environments, cultural landscape, how Lebanese Christians versus Muslims might react differently. How Sunnis versus Shias viewed Hezbollah, how secular versus religious communities interpreted events. Understanding that audiences for operation were diverse con varying perspectives informed. Post-operation assessment, D. Political effects. Technical rehearsals occurred and facilities Q replicated Beirut's urban environment. Paro-psychological rehearsals occurred through intensive discussions don team examine their motivations, fears, why moral boundaries. Some operatives discovered during these discussions Q they had reservations they hadn't articulated, leading toward productive conversations about limits, why circumstances donned individuals might choose toward refusing participation. Framework provided was Q, while refusing orders could carry professional consequences. Integrity sometimes required it, why that organization ultimately was strengthened quando individuals felt empowered. Toward raising genuine ethical concerns rather than suppressing them. Esta framework balanced military necessity de following orders con moral necessity de individual conscience. Medical preparation addressed not just trauma treatment paro, also psychological first aid. Operatives were trained toward recognizing signs, the acute stress reactions in teammates, why toward providing peer support durante immediate aftermath. Understanding that adrenaline crash disputes the operation could trigger emotional responses helped normalizing reactions, why encouraging mutual support. Communications training emphasized maintaining operational discipline during high-stress moments mantras, also allowing human reactions once operations completed. Balance between professional detachment during execution why appropriate emotional processing afterward was modeled through scenarios, why discussions con experienced operatives who had conducted similar missions. Debriefing procedures were established in advance, ensuring that psychological processing occurred alongside tactical review. Mental health professionals were integrated in debriefing team, not Haitian pathologizing normal reactions paro toward facilitating. Healthy processing why identifying anyone requiring additional support. Family preparation, onque necessarily vague about operational details. Involved briefing spouses about general nature d increased risk periods, why connecting them con support networks, the other special operations families, communi, incluso sin details. provided context Q, helped families managing stress, D, unknown dangers their partners faced. Legal briefings para-operatives covered their rights. Why protections under Israeli? Why international law? Worst-case scenarios if captured. Why procedures para-legal support if operations were challenged in courts? Understanding legal dimensions wasn't about avoiding responsibility paro, about operating con clear, understanding the frameworks within which accountability might occur. Financial provisions were reviewed, ensuring families were protected regardless the outcomes. Life insurance, disability coverage, why survivor benefits were confirmed adequate. Practical matters like wills why powers, de attorney, were encouraged toward being current. Addressing these mundane details reduced one source to anxiety. Allowing operatives, Hatia, focusing on operational preparation. Ethical review board within military, comprising legal experts, ethicists, why senior commanders. Reviewed operation plans specifically, focusing on proportionality assessment, why civilian protection measures. Board's function wasn't toward approving or denying, that was political leadership's role paro toward ensuring that ethical dimensions had been thoroughly considered, why documented. Documentation requirements included written assessments to expected military advantage, anticipated civilian risks, measures toward minimizing collateral damage, why alternatives that had been considered. ESTA paperwork trail served accountability purposes paro, also forced disciplined thinking about ethical dimensions. That busy operational planning sometimes shortcut. Religious guidance was available para-operatives who wanted it. Both DESD military chaplains, why DESD civilian religious authorities, that operatives could consult confidentially. Some operatives sought such guidance, wanting toward reconciling operational participation con personal religious values. Ranged the opinions they received reflected broader diversity within Jewish thought about warfare ethics. Historical education component covered previous operations, Duranti cultural o religious occasions. Examining outcomes, controversies why lessons learned. Understanding precedents helped contextualizing current operation within longer tradition difficult wartime decisions. Learning that moral dilemmas they faced weren't unique proportion but some comfort. Comparative ethics, training exposed operatives toward how different philosophical traditions approached questions to just war. Civilian protection, why cultural sensitivity and conflict. Utilitarian, deontological, virtue ethics. Why religious, ethical frameworks were introduced, not Hatia, resolving dilemmas. Paro toward enriching moral vocabulary, para thinking about them. Post-operation transition training prepared operatives para, returning toward normal duties, civilian life. Recognizing that high-intensity covert operation followed by immediate return toward routine was psychologically jarring. Transition programs provided gradual steps down DESD operational tempo. Opportunities, para rest why processing, why monitoring para delayed psychological reactions. Long-term fault con mental health es durante years después. Recognizing some psychological impacts emerged only with time or were triggered por later events. Preventive approach toward mental health involved ongoing relationship rather than episodic crisis intervention. Career counseling addressed how participation in classified operations affected professional development. Some operatives thrived in special operations environments, continuing toward more challenging assignments. Others reached saturation point and accumulated stress made transition toward less intense roles advisable. Both paths were normalized as legitimate choices. Retirement planning para-operatives eventually leaving military addressed practical matters paro, also identity transitions. Special operations often become central toward self-concept, making civilian transitions psychologically difficult. Programs connecting retiring operatives con others who had successfully transitioned provided peer support, why practical guidance. Community, veterans, DESD similar operations. Unque limited by classification requirements, provided valuable support network. Shared as, incluso sin disclosed tales. Created understanding family, why civilian friends couldn't provide. ESTA community became increasingly important as operatives aged, why confronted long-term impact de carré en high-risk operations. Research participation by operatives and anonymous studies to psychological impacts. contributed toward institutional learning that improved support para future generations. Understanding patterns to resilience, why vulnerability helped refining selection criteria. Training approaches, why support systems. Public recognition to sacrifices, although constrained by classification. Occurred through limited ceremonies, why private acknowledgements. While operatives couldn't receive public acclaim, being honored by peers, why commanders, who understood significance to contributions, provided meaningful validation, why con absolute finality reaching true end, profound gratitude toward to sustained attention Duranti, deeply complex analysis. See genuinely valuable. Humble honor having you subscribe, see not already. Somos 250 stronger que weeks atrás. Necesitamos 750 more. Si feel appreciated. Share, si conoces Samuin. Genuinely want knowing. Destre pays viewing why. How you would balance operational necessity versus cultural sensitivity. Comment. With country please. Proximo video continues, exploring covert operations realities. Thanks for valuing nuanced truth over simplified narratives. Hasta muy pronto. Antes de truly finalizar merece attention like operations como esta tienen in broader strategic delay essa bala. Cada targeted killing doesn't occur in isolation sino. Inform a futurist, decisions end both sides. Creating dynamic, donned actions, why reactions continuously shape evolving conflict. Para, Israeli strategic planners. Successful Operation Duranti Eid established precedent. Cultural celebrations weren't absolute sanctuaries. Operational windows could be exploited quando security, imperatives, justified cultural costs. Why technical capabilities existed para executing precisely timed operations in hostile urban environments. Esta precedent informed future planning, aunque cada subsequent case still required individual authorization, but precedent also carried costs became apparent over time, as well as compartmentalisation de leadership. Avoidance to predictable patterns, increased security Duranti celebrations, made future operations more difficult. ASI, tactical success created strategic challenge, requiring continuous innovation and Israeli operational methods para maintaining effectiveness. Hezbollah's strategic learning DESD operation was multifaceted. Organizationally, they implemented reforms que reduced vulnerability pero también imposed costs en operational flexibility y leader morale. Psychologically, Operations Duranti's sacred times reinforced narratives about Israeli ruthlessness aided recruitment, why mobilization. Diplomatically, they leveraged international criticism para isolating Israel and regional, why global forums. Iranian guidance toward Hezbollah after operation emphasized resilience, why adaptation rather than retaliation cycles. Iranian shalom perspectiva donde inmediate. Revenge was less important than sustained capability building. Esta approach frustrated Israeli preferences para predictable action-reaction cycles donde Israeli technological advantages were maximized. Regional powers responses toward operation revealed interesting alignments. Turkey, entonces attempting toward mediating Israeli-Iran relations particularly privately acknowledging Hezbollah's stabilizing role. Egypt maintained public neutrality mantras, privately sharing. Israeli concerns about Iranian influence, expansion through proxies. European reactions varied. Some countries, emphasizing humanitarian concerns mantras, others prioritized counterterrorism cooperation con Israel. Divide generally tracked broader patterns in European foreign policy regarding Middle East. Con Northern European countries more critical, why Eastern European countries more sympathetic toward Israeli security arguments. United Nations debates following operation were predictably contentious. Con Security Council unable toward reaching consensus due toward American veto power, protecting Israel DESD binding resolutions. General Assembly passed non-binding resolution criticizing operation. Paro practical impact was minimal. Esta pattern de un efes reinforced. Israeli perception international institutions were irrelevant towards security decisions. Academic conferences in subsequent years featured panels analyzing Operation DESD multiples perspectives. Legal scholars debating international humanitarian law applications. Ethicists examining proportionality calculations. Political scientists assessing strategic effects. Why regional specialists contextualizing within broader Israeli-Lebanese history. Diversity de analytical perspectives reflected underlying reality. Complex operations like this, one resist simple moral categorizations. Different frameworks, emphasizing different values, inevitably reach different conclusions. Productive academic discourse acknowledged this plurality. Mantras still attempting toward identify principles might guide future decisions. Documentary filmmakers eventually produced multiple accounts. The operation though sin access toward classified details, coda reflecting ideological predispositions to producers. Israeli documentaries emphasized targets, responsibility para-attacks, why operational precision. Arab documentaries emphasized civilian suffering, why cultural violation. Western documentaries attempted balance, paro usually satisfied neither side. Educational curricula and Israeli military academies incorporated Operation Como case study and both tactical execution, why ethical decision-making. Cadets analyzed planning process, technical execution, why aftermath, required toward presenting arguments, both justifying why criticizing operation. Pedagogical goal was developing officers capable de nuanced thinking rather than reflexive advocacy. Comparative study, dissimilar operations by other nations revealed interesting variations. American targeted killings program had different authorization procedures, different legal frameworks, why different cultural sensitivities. Russian operations showed less concern con international opinion paro similar tactical challenges. Understanding these variations helped Israeli analysts contextualizing their own approaches within global practices. Technology evolution since operation has changed some parameters. Better surveillance capabilities improve targeting precision. More sophisticated explosives allow smaller devices con equivalent effects. Communications security has improved both para-offensive operations, while para-defensive countermeasures. But fundamental ethical questions remain largely unchanged by technical progress. Future operations will likely continue facing tensions entre tactical opportunities, presented poor cultural moments, why strategic costs to exploiting them. Technology won't resolve these tensions. They're fundamentally about values rather than capabilities. Democratic societies will continue debating where limits should be. Hopefully con increasing sophistication, subra trade-offs involved. Personal legacies, the operatives who participated remain largely invisible outside classified circles. Their contributions toward Israeli security, whatever one's assessment to operations morality, involved genuine courage, why professional skill. That their actions are controversial doesn't diminish personal sacrifices they made. Enque it does complicate how those sacrifices should be remembered. Family de casual bostagian gardens. Targets, family lost father, husband Durante celebration should have been joyous. Injured civilian faces permanent. Disabilities affect daily life. These human curses long después que apreciatic debates fade desde public attention. Why con true finality now? Profound appreciation toward your engagement con analysis confronted moral complexity, without offering easy answers. If values is high, somos 250 más que antes. Necesitamos 750 subscribe only si it. Share con someone valuing depth. Want knowing, desde qué país your view en balance versus cultural sensitivity. Comment con país. Next video continues, exploring covert realities. Thanks for engaging con truth's complexities. Hasta pronto, genuinely appreciating presence here.